Slavoj Zizek once said, "Something that most men will never dare to believe, what you think is love, might actually be the art of your destruction." Because according to Zizek, relationships, especially romantic ones, aren't just about affection, pleasure, or companionship. They are also about power. And in the deepest, most unspoken layers of female psychology, there exists a paradox that will shock you. Women do not simply want you to love them. They want you to suffer for them. Now, when you hear that, it might sound like an insult or a bitter man's revenge statement. But Zizek is not a pickup artist, not a manosphere influencer, not a cynic. He is a philosopher, and philosophy doesn't speak in emotional tantrums. It digs into uncomfortable truths that polite society tries to bury. Here's the reality. Suffering, in a romantic context, is not always an accident. Sometimes it is cultivated. Sometimes it is a test. And sometimes it is a form of proof that you are invested enough to endure discomfort for her sake. This is not about women being evil or heartless. This is about desire, validation, and the deep psychological drama that fuels attraction. In Zizek's view, love is never symmetrical. One person always loves more. One person always sacrifices more. And the one who sacrifices less, the one who can inspire the other to give, to endure, to suffer, often holds the upper hand. If you think about your past relationships, you'll see this pattern. The person you obsessed over the most was probably the one who made you feel the most uncertain, the most unbalanced, the most desperate to prove yourself. This is why Zizek warns, men who try to be perfectly nice, endlessly available, and constantly accommodating end up being the ones. Women lose interest in the fastest. Without resistance, without tension, without some emotional challenge, attraction begins to rot. In other words, when a woman sees you are willing to suffer for her, she feels something that comfort alone cannot give her: power over your desire. In this video, we will break down Zizek's darkest truth about female psychology, how women subconsciously engineer situations where you feel tension, anxiety, and longing, not because they want to hurt you for fun, but because in that suffering lies proof of your devotion. We will cover the mechanics of this dynamic, the hidden signs you're being pulled into it, and the brutal choice you'll have to make if you want to keep your dignity without losing her interest. Let's start with part 1. Part 1. Why suffering is attractive. Most men assume that the surest way to make a woman happy is to remove all of her discomfort, to be attentive, to predict her needs, to shield her from every possible pain. But here's Zizek's problem with that strategy. It misunderstands the nature of desire. Desire, by definition, thrives on lack. It is fueled by something missing, something incomplete. If you remove all friction, all unpredictability, all emotional challenge, you kill desire at its root. In the same way that a suspenseful movie keeps you glued to the screen by delaying the resolution, attraction is maintained by keeping the emotional payoff slightly out of reach. This doesn't mean you should manipulate or torment someone. It means that deep attraction lives in a space where comfort and discomfort dance together. Women, consciously or unconsciously, understand this better than men. That's why many of the most intense romantic experiences men have involved situations where they feel uncertain, wondering if she will call back, doubting whether she's losing interest, or feeling the need to win her back after a fight. This uncertainty hurts, but it also intensifies desire. Zizek takes this a step further. He says that suffering is not just a side effect of love, it's often the very currency of love. In certain relationships, the amount you are willing to endure becomes the proof of your commitment. The late-night drives to fix her crisis, the swallowing of your pride when she's cold to you, the rearranging of your life to accommodate her whims. These acts, though painful, feed into her sense of your devotion. And here's the dangerous twist. Once a woman sees that you will suffer for her, she may, often without realizing it, begin to test the limits. She'll see how far your tolerance stretches, how much discomfort you will endure before you walk away. This is not about cruelty. It's about validation. Each time you push through pain for her, it confirms that she is worth that sacrifice in your mind. From her perspective, this can be intoxicating. It makes her feel secure in your desire. Ironically, more secure than constant verbal reassurances ever could. Words can be faked. Suffering is harder to fake. But here's where men fall into the trap. They confuse the presence of suffering with the necessity of suffering. They start to believe that without constantly proving themselves through hardship, they will lose her. This belief is dangerous because it shifts the relationship dynamic permanently in her favor. Once you accept that your pain is part of the deal, you are no longer negotiating as equals. You are a participant in her emotional game, whether she's aware of it or not. Part 2. The test you didn't know you were taking. Zizek often talks about the way ideology works, not by forcing you to obey, but by making you volunteer your own submission. The same principle applies in love. The woman doesn't have to demand your suffering outright. She simply sets the emotional stage in such a way that you step into it willingly. This is what we might call the unspoken test. It begins subtly. She might ignore a message to see how you react. She might cancel plans at the last minute and watch whether you get upset or accommodate without complaint. She might withhold affection briefly, not to punish you, but to see how quickly you try to earn it back. These are not always calculated moves. In many cases, they're instinctive. Female desire, like male desire, is rooted in evolutionary psychology. Across history, a woman's survival often depended on choosing a partner who would not abandon her in times of difficulty. Suffering became a signal, not of weakness, but of reliability. If you were willing to endure hardship for her, you were more likely to protect and provide when life got rough. In modern relationships, that survival logic has been transformed into an emotional one. The hardships are no longer predators, hunger, or war. They are uncertainty, jealousy, and emotional discomfort. But the underlying test remains. Will you still choose her when it's not easy? Here's the thing about this test. It's not graded on a pass/fail scale. It's continuous. The moment you pass one challenge, another one will eventually arise. Sometimes, these challenges escalate. You might start by tolerating mild teasing, then move to tolerating neglect, then tolerating outright disrespect. And by the time you realize you've crossed a line, your self-respect may already be compromised. Zizek would call this a self-perpetuating loop of submission. The more you endure, the more invested you feel. You think, I've already gone this far. I can't give up now. This is known in psychology as the sunk cost fallacy, and it keeps many men locked in toxic relationships, long after they should have walked away. Worse still, once a woman learns, again, often unconsciously, that you are willing to suffer without leaving, the incentive to treat you better diminishes. Why? Because your loyalty has been proven through your pain, not through mutual respect. And if pain works as a proof of love, why change the formula? The real danger here isn't that women want men to suffer out of cruelty. It's that the suffering itself becomes part of the love story. Remove it, and the relationship can feel strangely hollow to her. Which means, if you're a man seeking peace instead of constant tension, you may discover that your desire for stability directly conflicts with her desire for emotional drama. Part 3. The sweet poison of emotional drama. One of the most disturbing aspects of Zizek's analysis is his claim that many people, not just women, find pleasure in the very things that cause them pain. In the realm of romance, this paradox becomes sharper. Why? Because emotions in love are not measured on a simple scale of good or bad. They are measured in intensity. Think about it. A peaceful, consistent relationship may bring long-term stability, but it rarely burns into your memory.
Men in this situation often pride themselves on their endurance. They tell themselves, "Other guys couldn't handle her, but I can. I'm stronger than them. I can take it." IEK would call this the fetishization of your own endurance. You start to see your suffering not as a warning sign, but as a badge of honor. Every slight, every cold shoulder, every rejection you tolerate becomes another proof that you are a real man who doesn't run at the first sign of difficulty. The problem? Endurance is not the same as respect. And while you're busy proving how much you can take, you may be teaching her and yourself that you will take anything. This is the point where the power dynamic solidifies. She no longer has to wonder whether you'll walk away, because you've shown her, repeatedly, that you won't. And once that knowledge is secure in her mind, the balance of the relationship shifts permanently in her favor. IEK often draws parallels between love and ideology, and here the comparison is chilling. In politics, ideology works best when people willingly accept their own exploitation, believing it serves a higher purpose. In love, the same thing happens. You accept emotional exploitation because you believe it's proof of your devotion. The longer this goes on, the more your identity becomes intertwined with the role of the enduring man. You lose sight of who you were before this relationship, and you may even feel worthless without the constant struggle to prove yourself. In the worst cases, men in this state will sabotage peaceful, healthy relationships later on because they've been conditioned to associate love with tension and suffering. Peace feels foreign. Affection without tests feels empty. This is why IEK warns, you cannot simply rely on willpower to tough it out. In a relationship that's built on your suffering, the more you tough it out, the deeper you sink into a role that may take years to escape. Part 5. Breaking the cycle without losing desire. At this point, you might be thinking, if women want men to suffer, then the only way to protect myself is to avoid relationships altogether. But IEK would reject such a black and white conclusion. His point is not to demonize women or love. It's to expose the hidden structures of desire, so that you can navigate them consciously rather than blindly. The key to breaking this cycle is to separate emotional intensity from emotional instability. You can create passion without chaos. You can be exciting without being destructive. But to do that, you must first stop treating suffering as the primary proof of love. This means you have to be willing to fail her test on purpose. If she cancels on you last minute without a good reason, you don't rush to reschedule. If she withholds affection to provoke a reaction, you don't beg for it. If she tries to spark jealousy, you don't bite the bait. At first, this may cause friction, and yes, it may even cause her to walk away if she was only interested in the game. But that's the point. You filter out the relationships that are built on manipulation, leaving space for ones built on mutual respect. IEK would say that true love requires the courage to risk losing it. If you are too afraid of losing her, you will never be able to challenge the power imbalance. The paradox is that women often respect men more when they refuse to play the endless, suffering game. Why? Because by not being easily manipulated, you project strength, and strength, unlike desperation, is universally attractive. In practical terms, this means learning to create excitement in healthier ways, shared adventures, new challenges, playful teasing, and occasional mystery, without resorting to the toxic highs and lows of emotional warfare. You keep some unpredictability alive, but you root it in joy, not pain. Once you learn this distinction, you no longer fear peace in a relationship. You understand that stability doesn't have to mean boredom, and that real passion doesn't require you to sacrifice your dignity. IK's darkest truth, then, is not that women are cruel by nature, but that human desire itself is built on tension, and if you're not careful, that tension will always be supplied by your own suffering. The choice, in the end, is yours. Feed the fire with pain, or feed it with something far more sustainable. Part 6. The Power Shift, from Victim to Challenger. The most important turning point in this entire dynamic is when you decide, consciously, that you will no longer play the role of the endlessly suffering man. But here's what IEK would caution: simply walking away is not always the most powerful move. Sometimes, the real transformation comes when you stay in the interaction, but you refuse to respond in the way the other person expects. In the suffering dynamic, the woman expects a certain pattern. She withdraws, you chase. She criticizes, you defend. She tests, you strive to pass. The moment you break that pattern, you shift the entire emotional framework of the relationship. For example, if she delivers a cold, cutting remark designed to make you prove your worth, instead of defending yourself, you smile calmly and change the subject. If she tries to provoke jealousy, instead of reacting with anger, you acknowledge it lightly and then disengage. If she ignores you for a day to create anxiety, you use that time to invest in yourself rather than stewing in frustration. IEK would argue that this is a form of symbolic disobedience, not an open rebellion, but a refusal to participate in the ideology of suffering as love. In relationships, this kind of refusal can be unsettling to the other person because it disrupts the feedback loop they've grown used to. Suddenly, they have to reassess their position in your life. Suddenly, the comfort of knowing he'll always come back is gone. This is not about playing games or winning in some petty competition. It's about reclaiming your agency. When you stop being predictable in your suffering, you regain control over your emotional investment. And here's the surprising part: many women, when faced with a man who refuses to dance to the usual tune, will feel more attraction, not less. Why? Because unpredictability is still there. But it's coming from a place of self-respect rather than desperation. However, this shift only works if it's authentic. If you pretend to be unbothered but are secretly boiling with resentment, she will sense the falseness. True emotional power comes when you genuinely detach from a need for her constant approval. And that kind of detachment can only come from building a life so rich, so fulfilling, that no single person, no matter how beautiful, seductive, or emotionally magnetic, can dominate your mental world entirely. Part 7. Desire without chains. This is where IEK's insight turns from dark observation to a kind of liberation. The suffering dynamic, at its core, is a chain, a psychological tether, that binds your desire to another person's approval. Once you cut that chain, something remarkable happens. Your desire becomes yours again. You can still love deeply. You can still feel passion. You can still be vulnerable, but now, those things are choices, not obligations. They flow from you freely, not as a desperate attempt to pass an unspoken test. IEK would say that this is the only way to experience love without it becoming an ideology that consumes you. Once you stop equating suffering with proof of devotion, you open the door to a different kind of relationship. One in which attraction is fueled, not by tension and fear of loss, but by admiration, respect, and shared experiences. This doesn't mean you will never encounter tests again. Testing is part of human interaction. But instead of viewing these moments as battles you must win to keep love, you'll see them for what they are, opportunities to show who you really are, without fear of the outcome. If she values you for your strength and authenticity, the connection will deepen. If she only valued you for your willingness to endure pain, she will drift away, and you will see it not as a tragedy, but as a filter that protected you from years of wasted effort. In this way, you stop being the man who is chosen and become the man who chooses. You reclaim your role as an active participant in love, not a passive recipient of someone else's conditions. And paradoxically, the more you embrace this freedom, the more magnetic you become. Because confidence born from self-sufficiency is far more compelling than attraction born from fear.
Zizek's final warning. Slavoj Zizek's darkest truth is not meant to make you bitter. It's meant to wake you up, yes? Some women will, consciously or unconsciously, want to see you suffer, because your suffering proves to them that your love is real. But here's the twist. The moment you see this dynamic for what it is, you are no longer bound by it. You can choose to engage differently. You can choose to refuse the role of the endlessly suffering man. You can choose to create relationships built on mutual challenge and growth, rather than manipulation and endurance. And in doing so, you become something rare, a man who understands the mechanics of desire, but is not enslaved by them. Zizek once said, "The only thing to do with an illusion is to enjoy it." Love will always contain elements of illusion, unpredictability, and tension. The difference is whether you allow those elements to control you, or whether you can enjoy them without losing yourself in them. So the next time you find yourself enduring pain just to keep someone in your life, ask yourself, is this love, or is this a performance? And if it's a performance, who is really directing the script? In the end, the question isn't whether women want you to suffer. The question is whether you are willing to make your suffering the measure of your worth. If you refuse that premise, you step into a kind of freedom that no one, not even the most intoxicating woman, can take from you. And that is the only game worth winning.